Okay, this is another progress video for game in development synSpace drone runners for Android, available in Google Play Store and for Amazon Kindle. Anyway, again, we're talking about social features, which today is the piano, which has gotten very fancy lately, the synthesizer. So let's just review some of the new stuff in the synthesizer. Let's turn off the... This is kind of a busy background map. So you have your basic piano, and you have shortcuts to some instruments. And this button here lets you see the full list of instruments that you've got. And for any one of those, you're limited to playing on this little keyboard, but you can select a different region of a larger keyboard. This, I think, is middle C. Okay, so how does the synthesizer turn your key presses into music? Well, let's pick this FM Synth 9. I just kind of made that. And what we see here is, maybe it'll be less distracting if I do that. If you are familiar with modular synthesizers, you can pretend like I do that this little row of attenuators here represents your little Euro rack kind of toy, where you have a different kind of module plugged into each one of these slots, and that the actual knob is telling you something about that module, including the ability to adjust its primary value. And if you just look at the modules, I got them sort of reordered now to kind of indicate left to right the fixed pipeline that's wired in there. And so what happens is you first have this thing called FM, which is probably more properly called tremolo. Vibrato. And it is mainly an LFO that you can control. And one thing that's different is instead of just going down to 1 hertz, I now go to 0.1 hertz. You can pick the waveform that's going to be used, and you can dial in the amount of vibrato that you want. But one thing here that's useful is this. This is a center offset for the low frequency oscillator, but it also works as a keyboard, as a tuner. So if that's C, if I tap this twice, that same key is now D, and the whole keyboard's been transposed up 1 full step, or 1/2 step. So it's a good way to lazily change keys, but that when you're looking for it later, that's on this FM module that does vibrato and master keyboard tune. On the far other end is the AM, the amplitude modulation module, and it looks really similar, doing something really similar with an LFO of its own, with its own waveform, with its own frequency. This one, however, can be triggered by a contour generator. Oh, I get the other one to it too. I'm sorry. See how it says CG6? It's currently bound to CG6, which is this one right above it. So when that's set up that way, then the envelope all the way at the bottom selects the lowest frequency for the LFO, so 0.4, and the envelope all the way at the top picks the highest frequency in the range. So this envelope, which kind of pulses up and then comes down pretty fast and stays level and then goes down, means it would pop up to the fast speed of 0.6 hertz right away, but then fall down to the 0.4 for a while before. Well, it would never go below 0.4 because that's what you get for 0. If you really wanted it to stop, you would drag it to be 0 to whatever you want. And probably for tremolo, you probably want something like 7 or 8 hertz. Can I actually demonstrate this? If you tap this attenuator in the upper right corner, it toggles that module on and off. So, can I hear this? It's only doing it for a little bit of the start. Oh, if I increase the minimal frequency, that'll do it. So near the end of the note, you can hear that 3 hertz, and at the beginning of the note, you can hear that. Anyway, it's just something fun to do. So that's the AM module. It's basically for tremolo, but its center control acts as a master volume for the patch. So at the end of creating your work of art, you may have a patch that's an instrument that's louder than all your other instruments or quieter than all your other instruments. So here's where you can add a little last-minute adjustment. And unlike the other attenuator controls, this one actually has gain. So if your sound has gotten quiet, now you're better off if you can plan your day to not need this by having all the components to your sound be the right size to begin with. But it's nice to be able to do that. Also, you can clone an instrument you like and just make a quieter or louder version of it pretty easily. Okay, so that's the FM module and the AM module. And I have a whole nother video out that's pretty fresh on the filter module, so we won't talk about that in any great depth. So we'll go back and we'll look at an oscillator. Okay, so this is oscillator 2, the O2 as shown here. Actually, before I do the oscillators, let me just say there's also this module called noise, and basically all it does is make noise. So if we dial in a whole bunch of noise, and that's bound to, here, let's turn off the filter. So you can hear the noise there. Anyway, it takes some fiddling to get noise that you like. But going back to an oscillator, oscillator 2, shown here is O2. Ignore those little lines there for a minute. This oscillator is a sine wave. It's a pretty much non-distorted sine wave. Its frequency offset is 0, which means that when I hold down the C key, it plays a C. If I were to make that go up 12, these are half steps. Whoops. If I push that same C key, it'll play C, but an octave higher. You have to trust me that that's true there. Anyway, but usually, and unless you're trying to get harmonics in a different area, just keep it in tune with the keyboard. And then there's this fairly new thing called algorithm, which shows my having watched some YouTube videos about the Yamaha DX7, which I loved at the time but could never afford, and now it's, I guess, old news. But anyway, so what I bring into that here is a support for a certain amount of what's called FM synthesis. So I have additive synthesis by just adding together a bunch of sine wave oscillators or different kinds of oscillators. I have subtractive synthesis by taking any waveform that you've got and putting it through the filter to remove elements. And then I've got FM synthesis, where these row of 9 oscillators can be think of, you could control each oscillator individually, but in a worst case scenario you could chain them into 8 modulators in a row, modulating a final carrier that is what you listen to. So in a simpler case to that, we have oscillator 2 here, which is just an oscillator doing its little oscillating thing. But because of this little line here, we say, oh, I see oscillator 2 is actually being fed by oscillator 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to make that a little simpler. So the line like that just means that oscillator 1 is a modulator of oscillator 2, and the only modulation I do is FM. So if I turn that off over here by tapping this little region, it's your output. The oscillator output either goes to the mixer, which means you're going to hear it, or it goes to the FM cascade, which means you're not going to hear it. It's going to just be used to modulate the FM of the next guy over. Now the next guy over is not in cascade. He is going to the mixer, so you will hear him. So we're going to hear this second guy. Let's turn the oscilloscope back on. We're hearing him, but he's being modulated by this guy, and that modulation signal looks like this. Now if I change the modulation signal by dialing it down a little bit, you can hear it has an effect. If I dial it up, it has an effect. Now what you're supposed to do for chowning FM synthesis is you're supposed to have the modulator run at a frequency, generally speaking, higher than that of the carrier. So when I set the modulator, oscillator 1, to +3, it means that it is oscillating at the keyboard +3 half steps, and oscillator 2 is still set to 0, so it's oscillating at just the keyboard. So I'm modulating it by a signal that's just a little higher than the keyboard. And you can tell that it's already making a difference. And with one hand it's kind of hard for me to show you that space, but anyway, all sorts of values lead to all sorts of interesting stuff. Now if you turn the filter off so you can hear what that's really sounding like, it's just sorry. It's well, anyway, so I managed to turn that off somehow. Okay. And then the final thing is, if you're in FM cascade mode, you can also turn feedback on. Feedback 0 has feedback off. If I turn feedback on, that's when this extra little loopy line appears. And now this oscillator is taking its output and feeding it back into its own input, so it's self-oscillating on top of its normal oscillation, which is kind of weird. And then that signal is used to modulate oscillator 2. And again, by changing this ratio, you get different sidebands, and then you play with your filter to further enjoy it. And you can play with all your filter stuff. Anyway, so now we didn't talk about the contour generators, but we've talked about those lots, and they haven't really changed all that much. Knobs, the big change here is that all of those LFO controls are gone because they've now been moved to their individual module screens, which is good because there's now like 3 more than there used to be. And what else do we have? So I still haven't got a time varying distortion. You can manually set the distortion. Now why distorting the signal like that leads to that effect? I mean, FM synth is pretty cool. So just to take this out a degree, let's mute all the oscillators. So now there's no sound. Okay, and then let's go ahead and turn on oscillator number 9. And we'll set it at 0. 0 frequency offset, 0 half steps, and we'll turn it up to full strength and unmute it, and we hear it. And it's just a sine wave. Now I think you see where I'm going. Let's take module 8 and make it a cascade. Oh, and unmute it. And give it a frequency relative offset. And maybe dial in a bit more. And you hear it's getting sort of a tin drum kind of sound. And now let's add another modulator on mix, FM cascade. And now you can see there's 2 lines. So 7 is modulating 8, and 8 is modulating 9, and 9 is the only one that we hear. Okay, and we'll just do crazy things with the frequency offsets. And in theory, in true FM synthesis, these intervening signals are all sine waves and you don't distort them. But of course, you can do anything you want. This is your synthesizer. So we're just going to turn these all on, see if it explodes. Oops. It's definitely got a... Let's change one in the middle. Turn the filter off. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. So that's what it is without the filter. So kind of the theory of FM is it came into existence before there were digital filters. And it was a way of doing a lot of the stuff that filters let you do later on in terms of shaping the harmonic content. But, you know, once you have the harmonic content, why not just add filters anyway? So do everything. And then we got into emulation and all that crap. So I'll have to add emulation next, of course. Actually, that's probably already in the vocoder. Master plan. So the vocoder's been fixed a little bit. Let's see, is it working today? So there's this new display that is kind of a format display more than a music display for when fiddling with voice. And then the little keyboard thing now, when you do that, it automatically switches you between the format frequencies. Okay, so now it's recording at the musical frequencies. Oh, and it's playing back at real time. Yeah, that's an exciting demo. Stuck note. It's worse than a stuck note. We'll just turn the volume down. Did I talk about everything? I kind of gave noise short shrift. But again, not the whole thing has changed, so mainly just new ordering of the attenuators. Every module has its own detail screen with its own controls. In general, there's more controls than there used to be, but it's not like they're for the most part, weird, hard to learn. This feedback I didn't really talk about, but it probably doesn't work all that well anyway. But, so what can I say? Is that all I wanted to say? Okay, that's it.